Thank you, Dr. Hasey. Welcome, everyone, for this great opportunity to celebrate the success of one of our own, who was a former graduate student here, just like many of you in the room today. And graduate students are an integral part of both the research and education missions in the Larner College of Medicine, and continue to be part of our family through the Larner College of Medicine Alumni Association. And they are the sponsors of today's event. Please thank Dan Suter, Interim Director of Alumni Relations, and Dr. Mary Cushman, President of the Alumni Association, for supporting our graduate students, alumni, and organizing this event. And I encourage all of our current graduate students to continue to be involved with the college through the Alumni Association, even once you leave here and go on to bigger and greater things. And now I'd like to introduce our guest of honor. Dr. Stevenson is somewhat of a Renaissance man. He received his BA from the University of Vermont in 1994 in both biology and sociolinguistics. And he studied Spanish, Japanese, Norwegian, French, and ASL. He promised me he wouldn't give this talk in any of those languages. He then continued his studies at UVM, earning a Ph.D. in 2001 under the guidance of Mark Nelson and Joe Braden. Already a rising star, Dr. Stevenson co-authored 10 papers as a graduate student. So I always tell my graduate students they can graduate once they've published 10 papers, and he actually did it. Three as first author. He then moved to the University of Virginia to work with Avril Somlyo, who was a leading expert doing a lot of seminal work in the field of smooth muscle physiology. And while there, he successfully applied for multiple prestigious fellowships from both the NIH and Merck, rising up quickly through the ranks from postdoc to research associate to research assistant professor. He then left academia to work for Merck and in the Division of Pharmacology and Cardiovascular Disease, and again, quickly worked his way up the ladder, becoming an associate director of the Hypertension and Heart Failure Division, and then into the divisions of Scientific Affairs and Medical Affairs, and U.S. Medical Affairs at Merck. And he's now the global director for Medical Affairs and the scientific director for U.S. Medical Affairs. So, but just as importantly, he's been a mentor to many junior scientists and been a role model for men and women of color throughout his career at every stage, whether it's been in academia or in industry. His contributions to research leadership and have been recognized by numerous awards of achievement at Merck. He's done the Larner College of Medicine proud, and he is highly deserving of more accolades, including being the 2023 recipient of the Larner College of Medicine Graduate Alumni Award. And now I would like to introduce Mark Nelson, Professor and Chair of the Department of Pharmacology, who will present Andra with his award.
Thank you, Chris. Welcome, everybody. This is really a special pleasure for me. And Chris went through Andra's background and quite extensively, but I can tell you, and you've heard this before, when he first came to the lab, when he graduated from UVM, I looked and said, my God, that guy is tall. And I thought, and my cousins and brother-in-law are about 6'4", 6'5". I thought, he's taller than these guys. And then I was showing him around, and he brought with him Fumi, his future wife, who's not tall. And he's looking at our Faraday cages, and I thought he's going to lift up to a metal cage. I thought he was going to guillotine himself when he was pulling his head out. I said, this is not going to be a good way to start off with a thing. But it was a pleasure to have him in the lab. Did brilliant work as a research associate, then as a graduate student, and has become I guess in life, there are people you meet who you instantly like. And I'm not really a very empathic or intuitive person, but I instantly like Andra and Fumi. And I don't know why. And now I love the both of them. And so this is really a great pleasure for me. I'm very proud of him. And I want to now present you with your very own cheese platter. Andra. I couldn't think of anybody more deserving of this award.
Thanks, Mark. I really appreciate that.
$10 million, please.
Yeah, I'll put that in when I go back. Thank you very much. Oh boy, I didn't realize my voice carries. So, it really is a pleasure. I mean, I can't take any credit for what Chris and Mark really said. I think what you'll see in my talk is really geared towards, the title somewhat, unlocking success, and the together part is what's really important. And that's sort of what I want to convey to people today. So it's not a heavy science talk because, those didactic sort of lectures can be kind of boring. But it really is to sort of highlight the power of your network, the power of the people that you encounter every day. So that's sort of what we're going to focus on. And I sort of threw in this comic, which shows sort of that impact. So, if you read the top one, I'd like to mentor you. You can start by getting me a cup of coffee or some coffee. These are advisors you don't want. I luckily didn't have any of those. And then the next one you can see, which I will tell you, I'll let you read it. But when I was a student with Mark and Karen and Joe Braden and those guys, the beauty of it is that it really is about the training that you get, which subsequently impacts your future. And, Mark would allow the graduate students, I don't know if I shouldn't be sharing this maybe, but, we would go through someone's review to review a paper or manuscripts or those, and then Mark would follow behind. So it was a learning, right? It was a teaching for all of us as to how to be critical thinkers. And I really, have a lot to thank him for in that, because when I moved on subsequently, you really do have a critical eye for data, and you don't just accept things that people publish, but it also extends to your personal life. You don't just accept say, right? So you always want a credible source. And then the other is that, I've spent a large part of my career, I think, doing just that. Excuse me, today I'm going to be, your advisor, but tomorrow I might be your coach when you come in, right? And in my office, when I had an office, I don't have an office anymore, by the way. We've moved from that. You guys have very nice offices here. Is that I didn't have the just lost my train of thought making that too. When I was at Merck and I first came on board, I had great training, and I think all of you are going to get fantastic training here and then subsequently at UVA. And people would come to me and they would ask me questions, and I would think about it. And I would come back and I'd have this answer, and I'd say, oh, maybe you should think about this with your experiment, or maybe you should think about this. Oh, this is a great target to think about. And my nickname became Google, which I hated. And it was because what it said to me is that people thought I knew everything. And I always thought I knew nothing, right? It's just, this is what I would do in that situation. And it was based on the things that I'd learned from, my advisors and my mentors and folks like that. So what I thought I'd do is I'd start with, you guys trying to figure out some things about me, because I think they really tell you something about who I am and why I'm sort of the way that I am. So by just a show of hands, which one of these is a lie? How about number one? Who thinks number one is a lie? We got 1, 2, 5 people, six people. How about number two? 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh, Marky. Okay. Number 3. Okay. So I actually, oops, where is it? I don't know how to do that. I'll just tell you the answer. The answer is number one. I hate Halloween. So I grew up in a family that did not celebrate Halloween. And to this day, I really don't like Halloween. My kids like Halloween. My wife loves Halloween sometimes because she's from Japan and they didn't have Halloween. I did create a language. So as Chris said, I do have I did my other studies in sociolinguistics. So I like languages. So I created an artificial language myself, an auxiliary language. And I do have 12 siblings and I am the youngest of those siblings. So that tells you about collaboration, right? Because in a family like that, with hundreds of people, because my siblings have 6 kids probably on average, you have to learn how to get along with people. How about this one? Which one of those is true about me? Did I grow up in Florida and my favorite fruit is banana? Did I spend most of my early childhood in a hotel, or have I traveled to the most countries in Asia? Someone yell it out. What do you think? Hotel. Asia. So if you think between hotel and Asia, let's vote. Who thinks hotel? Who thinks Asia? Oh, the hotel people are right. I was a Zack and Cody, if you know that show. So I spent probably from age 3 until 11 in a hotel with my parents. So my parents ran this hotel and I lived there. So the others are false. I did grow up in Florida, but my favorite fruit is not banana. I hate bananas too. Okay, this is the last one. What's my favorite combination of food that I love? Ice cream and vanilla ice cream and Doritos. Oh, okay. Pasta and baked beans. Yeah. And the last one, cake and pork. I have the least on the one I like the most, which is cake and pork. I will tell you though, as a young child growing up in Florida, my favorite thing at that time, outside of this, was butter pecan ice cream and Doritos, and I would literally chop them up together. Now, you guys were a whole group of scientists and physicians and smart people. If you read the title of each, I wanted to see how observant you were. If I go back, and no one caught it, did they? I gave you the answer in the title. Each one of them that was correct. It was in order, 1, 2, 3. Okay. That's a lesson, right? And I wanted to convey that, is that when we go through data, when we see things in front of us and opportunities, right? You have to have a keen eye, and the eye and the ear are going to be really important. You have to listen. That's a big. So, what I'd like to do, and keep me honest with time, because I can keep talking, but really go through some background and sort of where my journey took me, and the people who were really instrumental during that time. But what I want to leave you with, and I'm going to say it up front, is that you get to decide your path and your story, right? And it's going to look very differently from your counterparts who are sitting right next to you, right? This is sort of the beauty of our diversity and sort of the train of thought and the training that we all get. So this is my beautiful family. We love Vermont, by the way. So I grew up in Tampa. My wife is from Japan, and we have 4 kids. 2 of them were born in Burlington. We've had a kid every state we've lived in. We can have no more, just so you know. But my family is really important to me. And I think they have driven part of my success, because you do a lot of things to ensure that they have a life that's going to be rewarding for them. So you work a little bit harder. And I think the same is for your mentors or your advisors, like, for me, for Karen, and for, Mark, is that you drive a little bit harder. You do things a little bit more because you want to also please them, right? They've given so much to you, so you want to ensure that you're giving back. There are 2 people here who are really important to me as well, and I saw them yesterday. It's Joe and Camille Lovering. So when I was a student at UVM, as an undergrad, they invite you to have, as a Black male or Black individual or Asian individual coming to UVM, which was at that time in 1989, 99% white. So they offer you a family and say, would you love to have a host family? All of these things. I said no, because I grew up with classes with lots of white people, and I was kind of the only Black guy there. So I was used to that. My wife, on the other hand, had studied in the U.S. as a high school student, so she had a family here. They adopted me immediately that same year, so I have known them literally for 30 plus years, and they're wonderful. They do everything for us when we were here. This is something before I get into the crux of everything, but this was probably 10 years ago, and it just tells you my love for this place and my heart for this place. And I'll give the slide so you can read this later if they want to provide. But it really is about forever changing. And what it describes as you read through is the green, the yellow, the brown turning to white. And you can imagine the seasons of Vermont, right? And all of those things that sort of entail listening to, the leaves crumble under your feet, or as you walk through the snow, that this crunch. But it becomes, this cycle, this sort of ever changing, ever adapting to whatever happens. We have mud season, right? Which other people don't have mud season. So having things thrown sort of in there. And that's really important for how I think one sort of looks at their career and looks at life, is that it's forever changing and you're going to be thrown things, but that's okay, right? Because what we know is that it's never a straight line, right? You may think that there's nothing right to do, that you can do sort of nothing. That's never really the case. For me, it seemed like maybe there were two choices. You stay in academia or you go into industry. And I came from that, time when if you go into industry, you weren't smart enough, you couldn't make it, it wasn't the thing you do, that's the dark side. I will tell you there's a lot of light over there. So if any of you are ever interested, please call me and chat. But I think this is the reality, right? The reality is that our true journey is usually the squiggly, crazy line of pathways and people engaging with you and coming in and out of your life. And sometimes it sticks. And, Chris sort of went through this journey of mine where I was going to med school. That was the whole thing, and you had to do it. And, I came to Vermont only for that reason. Even as an undergrad, by the way, because I understood what UVM's curriculum was, and that was to get you out of the classroom as fast as you could into the clinic, and others weren't doing that. Harvard wasn't doing that, et cetera. And then I became an undergraduate visit scholar. And this was a program that, tailored to ensuring that young underrepresented had, money and time to do research. And I got hooked. So I did that. And I learned a lot about genetics, a lot of things. And I was like, oh my God, we can actually manipulate things like this. So I was so enamored by that I stayed in that lab, even after my the scholarship was done. And then, of course, grad school with Mark, going through my postdoc, becoming the research assistant professor. And I will tell you that this journey from UVM to UVA was an interesting one. So I did a postdoc early on at UVM with Mark for a short stint as I was transitioning, and then I was going to Japan. So I wrote a Fogarty International grant. It got funded, and I was like, great. We set up everything. And then my mom, who had come to my graduation that year in Vermont, got sick. And I said, okay, the place that I've interviewed the closest was actually at UVA. And I said, okay, I have to go there. I'm going to terminate my fellowship, my International Fogarty grant. I'm not going to go to Japan. And of course, that was a close friend of Mark's. And when I went into that lab, because of the training that we had here, Avril and Andrew, who ran that group, the first thing that they said was, oh, just keep the grant and you can work on that. And I said, in good faith, I couldn't do that because that was work I'd done under Mark that was okay to do in Japan, because it was all around, infant biology. And I ended up applying for Merck Fellowship instead. So I terminated and I applied for the Merck Fellowship, which I ended up getting. And then there was a postdoc, another postdoc who was assigned to work with me. And I was like talking to Andrew and I'm like, are you sure? But it was all about mentoring because when I first came into the lab, I spent a lot of time with some of her postdocs who had been there for a few years. And I think it was just based on what we were able to do, right? It was all the critical thinking, the eye for data and all of those things. And then I'll just tell you the quick journey, right? Is that going from senior biologist, which is a managerial role at Merck, and I'll tell you how I got there in a sec. And then sort of going through this sort of cascade of different places, which literally was like the squiggly line that you saw. And my thing was that I always looked at, I don't like monotony, so I don't like to be bored, so I like to take on a lot of things. And when I first joined Merck, one of the things that I was assigned to do was sit with a group of people who were like Mark. And as a junior person, and I was like to my boss, are you sure? This is like so overwhelming. So I sit in this group and what you saw is that it was all about data. It was all about science, right? And I could do that. I could think about some of that stuff, right? Because of where I think I'd come from, which is, this legacy of two great universities and really good mentors. And we, at the end of the day, we created white papers, we did all these things, and it was all based on what I had actually asked them or instructed that we should do, and they kind of followed suit, and it was great. So we had a really good outcome of that. But you see this whole sort of transition into all of these roles is not by happenstance, because there are truly people who have influenced my life. And I threw this in because this gives that sort of picture of what a network looks like, right? This is drug discovery, and it looks very complicated, which it is, but it has literally hundreds upon hundreds of people to get one molecule approved, right, with the FDA or any HTA around the globe. And really, we fall here, I guess, for most of this basic science and the clinical sciences, say at a place like UVM. But you have all these regulatory people and all these other things that are in between, right, in order to get things approved. And as you go into post-marketing, right, so you have to keep the life cycle of whatever your molecule is. And then you see, how one thinks about developing new approaches, understanding usefulness, and that all of these things are intertwined in order to support the patients. And we also involve patients, by the way. And I've been fortunate. So I'm giving you this up front because I want to spend the rest of my my time talking about some of the people and sort of that contribution. But I've been fortunate and based on, really the concerted effort of a lot of people in supporting me in, not only, professionally and personally, but emotionally, right? Because it can be overwhelming doing sort of episodes that come into your life, like losing your parents. But here you can see I've worked in diabetes. I was part of our SGLT2 inhibitor program, which is a launched drug that serves lots of patients. We have a drug in chronic cough that's a P2X3 receptor antagonist, which I was involved in, helped run the trial, all of those things, which is great. Another beta-3 agonist for urinary incontinence, which most of you might know that drug. And then also for a drug that I now support most of my time is around an SGC stimulator, which is in the NO pathway for cyclic GMP. And I put this here because we're so fortunate, but I think maybe you see a sort of a theme, right? All of these are transporters or some kind of ion channel or some kind of, right? I spent a lot of time thinking with Mark and those guys, right? Being taught this stuff that you really have a critical eye for when things from the molecular translate into the cellular, translate into ex vivo and in vivo, and how those impact disease, right? So that translational science part is going to be really important. So I say that because, everybody needs a good foundation is what I'm driving towards, right? is that when you think about your day-to-day and the sort of foundation you need, it's based on your network. And this is one definition of a network, right? The crucial elements in both society and lifelong achievement, as it plays a significant role in both your personal and professional growth, opportunities, and overall your owned success, right? Because your success may not be what I think is my success, right? And I think you have to have that eye that you're okay with where you are and where you want to be, and not letting others influence that. I put in the contractile apparatus because we know, I mean, actin and myosin, Dave knows this better than all of us. And I spent a lot of time with Andrew and Avril, I mean, with Dave, with this group. And really, it's the foundation, right? When you think about something that's not really signaling, right? He'll sort of correct me there, but as a broad concept, actin and myosin, you have these two molecules interacting with each other, but they're driven by other things, right? There is actually some links to critical other molecules, and they can't function without that, right? So you think about calcium handling and all of those things and the power stroke. So it's the same. When you think about your network and those people who are most important to you, in order to have your system work for you, right? You need those other elements in order for you to be successful. Like, we never do it on our own, is where I'm going. And some of those things are kind of like the types of muscle, right? So I envision, if we're thinking about an integrative approach in physiology and pharmacology, and using muscle as the example, right? This is where we're trying to understand physiological systems, right, together, and how they interact and sort of maintain the overall health and function. If I think about skeletal muscle, it's very responsive to me, right? I can think about it, I can move my arm. It's how we do all these voluntary things. Those things tend to be the intentional things that we do, right? So I am intentionally enrolled in UVM in undergrad or grad school. I intentionally do a postdoc. I intentionally, try to become whatever, assistant professor or whatever your, garden variety thing that you want to do. So those are things that are there that you're going to sort of do intentionally. Smooth muscle, I look at, it's involuntary, but there are some places that it's not, right? You have some slight control over things like your bladder, which is a good thing to actually have control over, right? But that's ubiquitous. Those smooth muscles found in every hollow organ, it's everywhere. And you can sort of flex into those things. So those are things where you would have an opportunity potentially, right? Where, everybody kind of has the opportunity, but I'm going to take advantage of it, right? And I am a big advocate of that. And the other is around cardiac muscle, which I spent a lot of time thinking about the last few years. But it is the uniqueness, right? It's those places where it is unique to you. There is someone sitting at Merck in Rahway, New Jersey, named Andra Stevenson, who might know that there's a job available. And then someone says, well, I'm going to reach out to Andra and see, right? Or I say, I know so-and-so might be looking for something. Those unique opportunities are specialized, right? Those are where there are touch points that we flex in, where I become your sponsor. I say, I know this great person, and I'm going to do something about that and get them a job. So if you think about it that way, this is a place where your network becomes the thing that's most important, right? Because those are going to give you advantages over others who you end up competing with to some degree. And it really is about lifelong learning. And I'm not going to go through all of these, but I think, if you read the bigger titles, access to opportunity, knowledge and learning, no one can take knowledge away. That's what my mom always taught me, right? Whatever you learn, no one can take it away, no matter how hard they try. That's your power. Support, mentorship, diverse perspectives, right? Mark probably had one of the most diverse groups I've ever seen, language-wise as well as culturally. So we came with a lot of different ideas, a lot of different ways of working, and that's to solve problems, right? And you do that through collaborations. And then, of course, you build your reputation, as all of us are doing. But there's also the emotional component. As I mentioned before, like when my mom died, who do I count on? Who's going to support me? Who's going to give me, the things that I need in order to get through that? And then, of course, professional advancement is always going to be part of that. So these were some of the people who, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on everyone, but, these are my parents, really great people. And as I mentioned, education was really important. So that was the first foundation, is that I'm the youngest of 13. kids, it's all about education, education, education. My mom graduated from high school when she was 15. So really smart lady, skipped a lot of grades and was just so academic in how she wanted her kids to be. My dad didn't even graduate from high school. He ended up dropping out in 11th grade. Then he went to vocational school, ended up getting like certifications in like electrical, sort of engineering kind of things that he worked for our city for forever until he retired. And then there were two people who were really influential to me in high school. So Herman Valdez was my chancellor, but he was also of my private school that I went to. And he's the one who actually brought me from public school to private school because Florida has horrible public schools. And, said, smart guy, we should give him an environment to prosper, to thrive. So I owe a lot to this guy. And then Fran was the person who introduced me to Vermont, to this wonderful place. So she was my English teacher, who her father-in-law was an orthopedic surgeon who had graduated from UVM. And I wanted to go to med school, so it was a good pairing. So I talked to that guy a lot, which is why I knew everything about Vermont. And she introduced me to Old Gold. That's now she said, oh, there's a shop there. My brother-in-law owns that. He doesn't own it anymore. And it's changed a little bit. I sent her a photo. She was not happy. But she's meant a lot to me, and now she means a lot to my family. So this picture is when we've gone to visit her. She now lives in Georgia. And I put this one here because what is success? What does it mean to succeed, right? And I had this person, Kirsten was actually our valedictorian from my class. I was salutatorian from my class. Fran advocated a lot. So you have a lot of advocates and mentors. Fran, because this person came in her senior year to my school. I'd been there for all 4 years of high school. And our GPAs differed by 0.01. And Fran advocated that that shouldn't be the case because she brought in, some classes that we just didn't offer at our school. Anyway, so honorarily, this guy, as the chancellor, said, yes, you should be valedictorian, but we have to give based on the number. So, but I say that because in this caption was from my yearbook where, the class voted us to be the most likely to succeed. And it was just us to succeed, not knowing that I had all these people as support for me personally, right? And I saw it as sort of the team. I also play basketball, that's me. And it was great, like this team effort in order to achieve a goal. And when I joined this team, we went to state, so that was 2. So this guy was very happy. And then I skipped undergrad in a sense for a reason, because as an undergrad, you're sort of on a trajectory. I sort of outlined sort of where that fit and why I chose the path that I did. But these people have been really instrumental in my life and in my personal and professional career. There are more on the other slide too, by the way. George is definitely in there. And of course, Carrie and others. I could just list a whole laundry list of people. But what it taught me, and these are old data in the sense of I know all of you have moved on from this place. But for me as a technician, first of all, in Mark's group, and then as a student, working first with George, it was really, we're looking at, membrane potential, we're looking at ion channels, we're looking at all these fluxes in, blood vessels where, I never thought about the cerebral vasculature, to be honest, right? And linking that to a disease state, to hypertension, to those things, right? Where you start to think and put all of these sort of things together, where you then see, wow, from molecular processes interacting, you gain more knowledge about how the cell functions and then how the organism functions and then how to think about pathobiology, right? The other was with Karen. So I did my first rotation with Karen, when I became a grad student. And, based on some of the things that, I had done as a tech, the working with Mark, understanding ion channels, understanding signaling, all of those things, it was such a natural fit to go in and really think about, translocation, how things move across the membranes, right? Where they look like static barriers, but there are ways of getting things through. And one of those was looking at GTPases. We particularly looked at RAN, but here it's looking at depolarization, how activating things based on growth factors or any of these signaling molecules actually impact how other molecules behave. And what I will say is that that's how we function, right? What you do, and interacting with Mark or your peers may influence how you do something. I was just talking to Caleb this morning, how, some of the things that they're working on were just based on the fact that Mark brought someone from Cornell in, right? It starts to get you thinking about other ways of doing things. And I think what this taught me, which I use because I joined an ion channel group when I also joined Merck, is that because of my background in ion channels, I worked a lot with these folks. So it was exciting. The other were two other people. I'm really still close friends with Maria. So Maria is in Sweden, but she was also a postdoc in Mark's lab. We worked on INFAT together with, oh my God, how can I forget his name? Right as we were talking about Hill Eubanks today. Gosh, my goodness. And of course, George was on the other slide. But I will tell you that as I mentioned about going to Virginia, like the episode that happened and me going to Virginia, really taught me a lot of things about how fragile life is and that you have to make decisions and that you need to also move on from those decisions. So when I went to the Somnios, I went there and I just wanted to highlight one thing is that Andrew and Avril were known, and Mark can tell tons of stories, where especially Andrew was not known as a nice person, right? So Andrew would get up in a meeting like, we're having you give a lecture and he would just come to the podium and, to the mic and he would just make a statement, and not ask a question, and he would turn around and he would sit down, and more or less it was always some kind of way of chastising you for something you had done wrong, something wasn't right, in whatever you presented. And when I first went to their group and I sat in front of them and they gave me their spiel about the lab and, how they work and all of these things. So their way of working was we're here Monday through Saturday, all day. And Sunday you might need to be reading. And you could do that at home. And so I'm sitting across from them and I said, Andra and Avril, I have a family. I will give you all of my time and effort, but I will not come here on a Saturday if I have nothing to do, right? And you know what they said? Oh, okay. You see, you can't be, I'm not advocating for you not doing something, but it's like you also have to advocate for what you think is right for you, right? And there were many Saturdays I was there at 2 a.m., looking at the shaker, taking cells out, doing all kinds of crazy stuff. But they knew that I was going to work hard in their group. And this just shows some of the other things that we were doing, which was, it was a real change for me because we were looking at true calcium, handling and dynamics in sort of a real physiological state. And here was something that was around, permeabilized cells where we were, fixing calcium, and you were looking at then changes in contractility and all of these things. But then looking, being able to be part of, crystallizing molecules and that stoichiometry and really understanding how fragments of proteins actually could be inhibited by pharmacological agents, right? And really trying to understand the biology of how that's working was so like interesting, but also gratifying. The other was around, of course, the same thing is that, and these all were techniques, right? And I was talking to some folks this morning in the lab upstairs, and it was just this idea that as we're progressing with technology, with AI, with a lot of things, is that we gain a lot of information, but we also lose some things, right, Terry? we lose some things where it might be that you don't quite know how to do some of these techniques anymore, or you don't look at the data quite the same way. And what I'm pushing is that know how experiments are done, right? Know how things actually work, because it's going to aid you in the end. Because when I sit at my desk, and now I do strategy, right? When you strategically are responsible for thinking about a process, how we should proceed in doing something, right? You need to bring in a lot of experience. You need to bring in a lot of knowledge, and critical knowledge, right? That's really critiquing all of the information that's out there. And I think these kind of studies and these kind of things taught me that, because you really did have to learn how to do a Western blot, or, do a capillary gradient or something, not have your Sally or your automated systems do that. And at Merck, I've had a lot of mentors, a lot of sponsors and advocates. And one thing, since this is the last group of photos of people, I don't know if you guys noticed. Did you notice something about these people in contrast to me? Right? Is that's really important. They're all shorter than me, that's for sure. They're all shorter than me. This is literally the only same race person, right? And I think that's really important, is that although we're in this age of diversity and D&I and all of these things, and sometimes people feel like, I need to seek out people who look like me, who are just like me. Well, that's not the case, actually. All right? You want to also diversify the people who are influencing you, right? And I had a lot of support from a lot of people, right, who don't look like me, who don't have the same background as me. And they were such advocates, and they've been such, coaches and sponsors are really important. So if you don't have a sponsor, you need to find one. And we can talk about that later. But people don't know how I got to Merck. And Mark didn't know this slide would be in here either, right? I was a UNCF Merck fellow. So I had a connection with Merck, and this person, Lex, was my mentor from Merck when I was a fellow. But it was actually Scott who, I think he had an opportunity. So it was one of those things where someone reaches out to you because they know your work, and they think you're going to be a perfect fit for a job. And they reached out to him. And of course, he was on his way somewhere else. And I don't even know if he knows that. So this guy, Mike, gave me a call one day while I was at UVA. And I answered my phone. I'm like, who is this? Calling my phone, I don't recognize the number. And he introduces himself and he says, oh, we have this great position at Merck, and I was wondering if you wanted to apply. And I said, oh, at Merck, like the pharmaceutical company? He was like, yeah. And I said, oh, no, thank you. So I hung up and called back the next day. And he says, we got your name from this guy. And, he says that you'd be a great fit. They wanted to do a lot of ex vivo stuff that was all, ion channels. They wanted to do, ring experiments and all of these contractility things, and wanted to, have someone who could do that and lead a group. And he said, just come in. So I said, okay, if I can give a talk, then I'll come. And so I gave a talk there. I went there, I gave a talk. And I will tell you about the dark side, is that I was swayed, not by pay, because, with my Merck fellowship, I was paid a lot of money as a postdoc. So I'm not complaining about that at all, because it was an industry, in quote, sponsored postdoc. But they asked the right questions, right? When I sat there, they asked me very complicated things that, Mark and Avril and Andrew and, people would ask. And I was like, wow, like they really understood the data and sort of the caveats and the limitations of the data. So immediately, I said, well, let me think about it, because they offered me the job before I left. And I said, oh, I got to think about that. So I went back and talked to Avril, and of course the rest is history, because obviously I took the job and I never looked back. It's been the greatest experience. But what I wanted to take from this is, there were some quotes in an article that was written about Scott when he actually received their Outstanding Researcher Award, right? And these things were really important. So if when you get the slide, just read through some of them. But it really is about supporting success in the career of students and postdocs and junior researchers and those, right? It's about giving back. It's about really understanding what you've been afforded based on your network that you've created, and extending that to other people. And I'm not going to go through these data. I know I'm running out of time. But some of the things that I've been fortunate. So when, again, I joined Merck, the first thing that Mike ended up asking us to do, so it wasn't just me, it was a team, and it actually came from our president of the labs. So at that time, there was this drug called torcetrapib, that's a CTP inhibitor, and so for atherosclerosis, that another company had run their clinical trial, and they wanted to get this drug approved. But there were some warts, right? There were some things that from the clinical study showed up. And so we also had one, which was called anacetrapib, this one. And our president wanted to understand why. Was this because of something with the drug, or was it something with the mechanism, right? So they assembled a whole team of us to sort of figure out what that was. So that was my first big project when I joined the company, and it really was trying to understand sort of what were the caveats and those issues around torcetrapib. And of course, what we identified was that there were issues with aldosterone that our drug did not have, which was, thank God. The other was I was involved in a lot of other things, soluble epoxide hydrolase, some really good publications, some really good things for drug development, and really trying to understand targets. So at Merck, I was part of what we call new targets as well. So you wear lots of hats. And within that team, which was probably about 8 or 9 of us, we were the ones responsible for in specialty hypertension at the time, which targets were important for pathophysiology of X disease, right? So we were looking at diabetes and hypertension. We were looking at hypertension and obesity, hypertension and heart failure, all of them, right? And so some of these targets were those things that were really important, and it really taught you. And we have probably less than a month that each one of you in this row, you would be assigned 10 targets. And our monthly meeting, you would come in, and your job, Maria, was to go through all 10 targets and be the expert on all of them, right? So they could ask you anything, and people asked you anything. It was from literally genetics and expression all the way through if there were any clinical data and proof of concept. So it really taught you to come up to speed really fast and to be really critical of things, because what decisions you make would then potentially cause an execution, right? Meaning I now need to do lead optimization, or target identification, all of these things that would cost a lot of money. Around what I mentioned, the beta-3, some really great data there. That is a product that is used for urinary incontinence. And then what I'm so happy with failure, probably for the last 6 years or so, is there is a drug on the market for a form of heart failure, which is HFrEF, which is vericiguat. And of course, it falls into this cyclic GMP pathway. And what we show is there's remodeling, there's impact on ejection fraction, on all the things that you want to have a benefit, especially in patients who are worsening, who have a worsening heart failure. And those, helicopter patients that you think the revolving door, they keep coming into hospital. And how do you then improve outcomes for those patients? So really important. And then last, what I'll leave you with is, especially for the students, be fearless, right? So really don't be afraid of the unknown. If your advisor or someone comes to you and they say, oh, I really think this would be a great opportunity, take it, right? you really have nothing to lose. You have a lot to gain, right? The other is really seize the moment. So those opportunities that present themselves, challenge and stretch yourself. So just don't be afraid, right? If you think, wow, I don't have the knowledge, I think I'm going to screw up, right? The whole point is that if someone delegates something to you, right, what they're really telling you is that I trust that you can do it. But secondly, you might not get there the same way I get there, but that's okay, right? And when you need to flex to me, and I will support you, right? So you identify those people and being flexible and agile. And then the last that I will say is that you have to listen. You have to listen. You have to listen, right? If you're like me, I'm just babbling on up here. But you really have to take the time to listen, and especially if you want to, be the Mark Nelsons and the, Dave Warshaws of the world. It's that you really do spend a lot of time listening to what people say in order to formulate new ideas, right? Because if you can never take in what someone is telling you, it's really difficult for you to actually do that on your own. So you just won't get very far if you're not a good listener. These are just some of the examples of where I give back all the time. I was heavily part of UNCF. So once I joined Merck, I was now on the other side of reviewing all of the applicants. And we had lots of them. I've mentored and coached a lot of people in the local schools with their STEM programs. I spent a lot of time. This is a program out of New York City. These are young students, so they're junior high to high school students. This is a program that is actually designed, so once you get your, say, your PhD or your MD, and you want to transition to industry, so it's specifically for mentoring and coaching folks who have their advanced degrees, but they want to transition from academia into an industry role. And I act as mentor for a lot of those students. And then the other we have lots of interns who come into the company. And I used to run one of the programs, not this RAP program, it was a counter to that, where we would bring in tons of interns to do research. And if you come to a company, right, where sometimes you go in for an internship, and remember the first comic slide I showed where the person said, let me go and get, could you get me some coffee? We never put you on something that's not important to us. I think that's really important. And when you go into, even for grad students, I'm sure when you chose which lab or which group you were going to be in, you go into a group that it's not unattainable for you to finish, right? And I think that was the beauty of being in Mark's group, is that all of the graduate students within the group, we felt empowered to be the same as the postdocs who were in the lab, or the assistant professors who were in the lab, because Mark treated us the same way, right? What was the responsibility of those folks in the lab was also our responsibility. So you actually learn a lot from that. And, this is one, it comes from Dr. Maxwell, but it's the last quote I'm gonna leave you with. There are versions of this, but it all says the same thing. Let your lights shine so bright that others can find their way out of the darkness. And it really is giving back, right? All the things that you have to give back as part of your network are going to be really critical for ensuring that everybody moves forward together, right? And if you participate, if you come into the group, right, we own nothing at Merck. And actually, if I discover something, in my lab, in my basement, if I had a lab there, it belongs to Merck as long as I'm employed by Merck, even if it's not on Merck soil or Merck dollar. So that's what I'm going to leave you with. And this is something I already mentioned to you. You do get to decide what your path and your story will be. So I'll end there.
A wonderful and inspiring talk. So one more round of applause for Dr. Stevenson. I think we are a little bit tight on time, so if you don't mind, I'm going to ask you to catch Dr. Stevenson out in the hallway for any questions and follow-up that you would like to have. I also realized in my opening remarks, I forgot one critical bit of information that Liz had suggested I share with everybody, and that's that there will be food and festive beverages at the research rally tomorrow evening from 5 to 7. So put it on your calendar, let that also be a draw for our research celebration. So thank you again, Andra, for a great.
Pleasure. Always a pleasure. Nice meeting you.
Very nice to meet you.
Very nice meeting you.
Enjoy the day.
Thank you.